Hey there! Welcome to Let's Make a Health Connection. In this podcast, we introduce, interview, and showcase the many healthcare providers and resources that we feature on our website, localhealthconnect.com. I'm Jennifer Barber, and I'm a licensed clinical social worker in Washington and Oregon, and I'm happy to be part of the Local Health Connect provider community. Julia Schetky is an associate licensed mental health counselor from Vancouver, Washington. Her main focus is on trauma, and even more specifically on religious, spiritual trauma and cult work. She enjoys working with clients who have a long background of being in groups that were not healthy spiritually and helping them to find their way to wholeness. She works for Breathe Mental Health. When she's not working, you can find her with her 2 golden doodles in the backyard in her hammock, and she loves spending time with her husband and her son. She recently picked up the craft of macrame with the intention of bringing the 70s back again. Yeah, 70s in your heart, huh?
70s. Wouldn't it be nice if I could make a macrame hammock?
Do it. Do it.
I hadn't really thought of that.
Until just this moment, you can do it. You can do anything.
I can.
Hey, thank you. Thank you so much for being a part of this today and just letting us introduce you even more to the Vancouver, Washington community.
Thank you.
I'd like to just kind of dive in and talk about spiritual trauma. This is your niche, and I just wonder how you might explain that.
The spiritual trauma is, at its core, a loss of a sense of meaning, of a sense of self, of a person's view of a higher power, and damage to the core of who a person is. And basically when love and fear come from the same place. So when somebody is in a group and they have found that that group is no longer healthy because of one of those things, that's how spiritual trauma is defined.
Tell me how specifically that might affect someone.
So it can affect people in a lot of different ways, but it can affect people by breaking down both someone's spiritual beliefs, which they may have held on to for part of their life if they've just entered it, or if they've been in that group for their entire life. That whole structure may have broken down. It may affect a married couple if only one person is leaving and one person is staying.
Mm-hmm.
It can affect their basic sense of who they are in the universe, their feelings of afterlife. Where do I go? Do I go somewhere after I die? It can affect especially their family systems. If their family is within a group and they leave, that family may no longer be allowed to speak to the family member that has left. And that may fracture that whole family. And also, when someone leaves a group, their whole community could have been that group. And now they have no one, and it's very isolating. And I just thought of one more, is that many times people, all of their resources, financial, housing, support, food, their basic needs may have been taken care of by a group, and they do not have those any longer. So how do they survive outside of that group? And so it's a completely rebuilding process. So there's so many different ways that somebody can be affected by leaving a group or having spiritual trauma.
It was just brought into my awareness the other day that this kind of trauma can come not only from like a church setting, but somebody was explaining to me that it could be even like a yoga setting. What do you tell us a little bit about that? How could that possibly
Yeah,
happen?
for sure. I think it was even a conversation we were
Oh,
having
maybe
the other
so.
day. Yeah, and it can come from all sorts of places. Like it can come from mainstream churches, fundamentalist groups, cults, but it can also come from, like you said, yoga studios where people are following a certain teacher or doctrine within their yoga studios, and someone, when you're participating in a yoga studio, someone is really opening up their body and their soul to growth and to what their higher power is, and really connecting to movement and to source. And people are vulnerable in that state. And people have been violated in that state by their teachers, um, both within their body, having people being touched the way that they shouldn't be touched, violating in that way, or having doctrine given to them that crosses a line, and yet because of their ultimate trust in the person that is giving it to them, they absorb, and only after they leave or start to question that do they understand that it could have been abusive. And that includes also like retreat centers where people go and they are separated from the world for a while and really immersed into an isolated teaching. And until they leave that isolated teaching and start to be able to question and ask, is this right for me? Is this person the person I want to follow? They may not realize that something traumatic may have happened, that this is not something I feel is healthy. And so, this constant checking of, is this right? Does this resonate with my soul? Has this person led me in the way that I feel is appropriate? Is really important. Like the idea is, can I freely ask questions? Do I have autonomy and agency to come and go? Is critical to a healthy relationship with spiritual groups.
How is spiritual trauma different than any other types of trauma? Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, it can be the same in many ways, but because I think the big difference that I see is it transcends and encompasses all areas of self. It's I see psychological trauma, I see spiritual trauma, I see physical trauma, I see emotional trauma all mixed together. Where when we're looking at trauma that's not religious or spiritual, it encompasses several of those areas, not necessarily all of them. It's a real big core loss of self issue rather than just several of the other areas. Not just, but like several of the other areas. It really rocks somebody's eternal world. And that is just a core wound that may take for the rest of their life to rebuild again.
When you say that core, I think of soul wound, right? Just that deep, 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 like a betrayal. Some of this that I'm hearing you talk about really hits on that word betrayal, right? From someone, we hear about soul wounds like within the military structure, right? You've got someone in power that may have done something that you never could have conceived that this person would ever do. And that is such a deep soul wound, right? Because there's significant betrayal that happens.
Yeah, and I think part of that's a great point, Jennifer. I just brought up this thought that oftentimes the person in charge is that voice of source, the voice of God, and to have that person betray you is so close to having source or God betray you. And it is very hard to untangle those threads for people. And so having that betrayal by almost God is so hard to work through. Where was source? Where was God when these things were happening to me?
Right.
Yeah.
This is deep stuff, Julia.
It
It's
is,
like super
yeah.
deep stuff. And I think about people in the community who might listen to this who have had this kind of trauma. And I almost think that, I mean, it's hard to seek out a therapist anyway. But to have this kind of an experience, I don't know that there are a lot of therapists out there who understand and can meet someone where they are regarding this, right? There's significant, almost as I hear you talk, it's like shattering, deep shattering that happens. And so, I just want to take a break just to say wow and thank you. And yes, this is deep stuff before we can continue on, because there's more I want to ask you.
I would like to say one thing.
Yes.
I know we didn't, this wasn't a question we were going to talk about. I would like to call out also how I see a lot of our beautiful queer community in this population as well. Those who are often in the Christian church who never found their place there because of who they are. And the deep wounds of that, and trying to reconcile what they believe and who they are and the way that they are treated. And I would really like to just state that and how that fits so squarely in this, that spiritual trauma. So I'd like to just make sure that is known.
And I'll bet you that a lot of people out there have either known someone in the LGBTQ community who came out and was shunned or ostracized by their church, or maybe someone's listening who is part of the LGBTQ community who absolutely knows what that feels like firsthand. So thank you for pointing that out.
Yeah.
So, what are some areas that wounded people struggle with?
So, when people come out of a spiritually abusive group, their sense of self is rocked. And it's hard, I've found, to not have a rule book anymore. There's a sense of peace and organization to have simple instructions on how to get where you need to go, how to be a good person, what is wrong, what is right, this black and white that's so comforting. And when you get out of black and white, there's all these colors, and that can be confusing. What do I do? There's no one to tell me what is this okay? Is this okay? The world is full of colors now, and I don't know what to do with myself. And that's very hard for a lot of people coming out.
Overwhelming.
It is overwhelming.
Like,
It is so
whoa.
overwhelming. Yeah, what do I do with myself? I don't know. Um, and a lot of people go back into another group or another religion because there's guidelines.
Right.
They struggle with afterlife beliefs. What happens to me now? What happens to my family now? Will I see them again? Um, what are my core values now? I used to believe this about myself, but now I feel like I'm a totally different person without these sets of values that I used to have. I don't know who I am now. They struggle with their basic needs often. And then their family connections. Are they strong because they've left? Are they weaker because the family is struggling with their new identity? Or are they gone completely?
Right.
Those are huge struggles that my clients end up coping with.
So if someone is not quite ready to reach out to a therapist to discuss this, but maybe working up to it, what are some resources they might be able to dive into that might help start the healing process? And where might they be able to find these resources?
Ooh, I'm so thankful this is starting to become talked about so much more. So there's 3 great websites that I would direct them to. One is the Reclamation Collective. They have lots of resources there. There's like a data bank of all kinds of links there. I love them. There's Recovery from Religion, which has also several different religions listed there and faiths listed there, so you can choose your own adventure. And then the Religious Trauma Institute. All 3 of those are some of my favorites. And then there's a book I love called Sacred Wounds. It is a beautiful, beautiful book that kind of discovers how you're feeling, what you're struggling with, and it's just a beautiful, warm cookie of a book.
A warm cookie of a book. I love that. As I'm hearing you say these things, I just want people to know that we can add those to the show notes right underneath the podcast on the website so that people who are listening to this find it on YouTube or finding it on Local Health Connect. Those resources will be right there.
Love it. You're so great.
Oh, you're so great. Where can people find you, Julia?
Oh, I can be found in a couple places. My website is breathementalhealth.com.
Okay.
I am also on the Insta at Breathe Mental Health. Those are my biggest places.
And are you seeing people in person or via telehealth or a combination of both?
Also a good question. I am all telehealth all the time.
All the time.
All the time. I see people in Washington, and I have openings for religious trauma clients.
Awesome. Very, very cool. Before we end today, do you want to tell people any new things that you're working on or involved in that they might be interested in?
I I sure do. I currently am running a group on a really fantastic book. I almost held it up like that would make a difference.
Yeah, nobody can
Um,
see. I'd love to see
I
it. If
also
you have it, sure, I'll
I
look
know.
at it.
I also talked with my hands the whole
Yeah.
time through this podcast. So I didn't really see it. It's called Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents. It's a beautifully poignant book for people who have parents that maybe did not parent them wonderfully. So that's a book group I'm doing, and I'm going to do it again. So if that's something that interests people who are listening,
Who's the author
um,
of that book?
it's Lindsay Gibson.
Okay. Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents?
That's the one.
Love
Yeah.
it. And is this group weekly, once a month?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a weekly group for 5 weeks.
Okay. And when does your next one start?
Oh, that's
you
a
know?
really good question. I'm going through October with this one, and I probably will do another group in the new year so it doesn't bump up against the holiday
Okay.
season.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you so much, Julia. It's been a pleasure. I know we could talk about this topic for probably 2 hours. We could do such an extended podcast on this. But this is just to give people a taste of what you do, where your passions lie, and where people might be able to find you. So I thank you so much for calling in today and being a part of this.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful day. Thanks again for listening to Let's Make a Health Connection. Find us online at localhealthconnect.com, as well as Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Links and show notes for this interview are available on our podcast page. These interviews are really fun, and I hope you made a health connection today. We'll talk again next time.
Let's Make a Health Connection, copyright 2022, all rights reserved, is the exclusive property of MBS Therapy, LLC, a Washington-based company. Local Health Connect is inclusive and does not endorse any political or religious group. Thank you again for listening, and we'll see you next time on localhealthconnect.com.